things have really changed in the last 30 years. 1960, it was probably 1 in 12, 1 in 14 people were farmers. When it was really worked great, 1915, 1920, even 1940, we had 1 in 10, 1 in 8. I think 1 in 8 is the best number. 1 in 8 people growing food meant that almost everybody knew who was growing the food in their neighborhood. And economically, that's how it works the best. The more money you give a farmer when it's 1 in 8 people, the more economic vitalization comes into the economy, because that farmer is spending his money in the economy. Mm-hmm. So a farmer that's feeding 10 people, that dollar given to the farmer literally turns into $10 worth of gross national product, mm-hmm. or whatever money flow. Now we have one farmer in 200.
Wow.
And those are multinational corporations, and what we call farming now is capital-intensive farming, which means that a farmer, to be able to pull off his crop, has to borrow money at the beginning of the year to buy his seed, to buy his fruit, because he's basically breaking even, makes a little bit of money, and the money, where does the money go? To paying off the interest on the loans he made before. Yeah. Now, most of these farmers are corporations, and so they're using this lack of money as a tax loss scheme. So farming has become a sort of a tax loss scheme where large corporations that are making huge amounts of money are able to not pay taxes because they're declaring their losses on growing their farm goods. Obviously, we eat a lot of different foods. And I've gone into this before, and if you listen to go to John Balloon on YouTube, you can hear some interviews I did, and we talk about this. The foods we eat today, I mean, it's even off the scale now. I mean, the reality is the foods that we are used to eating are just 5 or 6 foods. Corn being the major one, soybeans, wheat, rice, potatoes. What other foods are people eating? Pretty much, that's about it, right?
Yeah. Well,
sugar,
your lettuces.
Lettuce. Well, lettuce. I'm not talking about vegetables and stuff. I mean, basically the centerpieces of your food. Are those things. All those things, basically, what they have in common is they can be stored for long periods of time, and they can be moved long distances, and they can be grown on huge, gigantic farms. They can be grown on 30, 40,000 acre farms. And the deal is we have to go back to 1915 when this country was taken over by the Federal Reserve. It was realized that when farmers got a high price, and back then farmers grew lots of things. A farmer that was growing corn, during the winter he had cattle that were eating the crop. He was milking cows. He had a little bit of a corn patch, and he had a wood lot over here. He was making coal for the steel industry or whatever, coal. He was making charcoal, and he had a wood lot, and he had his gardens, and he had his orchards, he had his vineyards. A farmer might have 500 acres, and maybe 100 acres was in corn, maybe 100 acres was in alfalfa for his cattle, and stuff like that. And he had a cycle, and he moved the corn around, and it had a rotation that followed corn and soybean, maybe. And soybean wasn't a big crop back then, but vetch or whatever it was, some kind of nitrogen-fixing legume, and they moved it around. Now it changed. I guess I'd like to say it was Orville Forbes back in the Johnson administration began the change, but it was really set in stone by a guy named Earl Butz, who was the Secretary of Agriculture under Nixon. And the reason that it changed is not the same reason that they told us when it changed. And what happened in the 60s, it really changed. And actually, in the 50s is when it really, really changed. If we look at I forget the guy under Eisenhower who was Secretary of Agriculture. He was a Mormon guy. Forget his name. But after World War II, that was when we brought in all the chemicals. That's when we brought in all the nitrogen, cheap nitrogen, and farmers no longer had to do rotations to build up their fertility. They no longer had cattle that they used the manure on to fertilize their crops, because we moved into large-scale feedlot operations. And manure now became a waste product that went into sewage systems and called non-point source pollution, and became basically a waste product. Became a source of pollution, non-point source pollution. And things started to really change. We started having these huge factory farmed animals, and farmers, and that dropped the price. And cheap food is really a great thing, because everyone went, oh, if I have some cheap food, I'll have more money to buy a car, or I'll have more money to buy a new TV or a radio. Back in those days, so that was basically what people, or a washing machine, or a new washer dryer. And that it was sold to us as cheap food, as let's get food cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But nobody really understood the implications. Why did we need cheap food? Because when there was 1 in 8 people were farming, and they were making the right amount of money, money flowed through our economy in such amounts, huge amounts, because the whole idea of a real economy is that we're consuming, and therefore we need to consume again. And the ultimate consumer item at that point in the 40s and 50s, really the only really good consumer item was food. We consumed food. Everything else at that point in our time, people made cars that lasted 30 years. People made tools that lasted 20. Those weren't consumer items. Now they are. Mm-hmm. Now they are. But back in the 50s, you bought a car for 10 years. Yeah. 15 years, it was still a good car. They were tanks. They were unbelievable. It was just unbelievable what they were like. And this planned obsolescence came in the 60s, in the 50s and the 60s, and they started figuring out how to make things break after a certain amount of time. And now we have
They did
devices.
very well at that, by the
way.
Yeah,
and now things break. Because when I was a kid, man, you had, you know, if you walk down Main Street, there was 1 or 2 shops that fix things.
Yeah.
Now no one fixes things anymore because everything's so cheap. If it breaks, you just throw it away and you buy something new. So all those things became the consumer item. But when food was the consumer item, only consumer item, and people bought that food at a fairly high price, that money went through the economy in such a way that there was plenty of money to buy cars. There was plenty of money for manufacturing. There's a direct relationship of what the price of corn was to how much manufacturing was happening in the country. Everything was in a balance. And so when the Federal Reserve really started getting its cojones, really started getting control of this country, they really realized right at the beginning, in the 20s and 30s, that they had to bring the price of food down. And the only way they could bring the price of food down, because if they brought the price of food down, let's say they brought the price of food down, the farmer was getting 80 cents instead of $1 for whatever he got. Now, if it multiplied 10 times, it only made $8. But the economy needs $10. So where's that $2 going to come from? It comes from somebody going to the bank and borrowing it. So to create demand for credit, and that's all they needed. Because when they create that $2 to fill in the gap, they're also making that a debt instrument. And that $2 needs another 20 cents to pay it back, but that hasn't been created. So where's that going to come from? That comes from basically the middle class and from the farmers. And why does it come from the farmers? Because the farmer, to create his wealth, and I'm seeing this now with my 20 acres over here in Kona, I have a lot of stuff. There's no doubt about it. I have a lot of land. I have a lot of magnets. I have a lot of coffee. But it takes a lot of money to harvest it and get it monetized to sell it. So I can lose money. Like this year, I kind of lost money because I didn't have a lot of coffee. But I have food growing on my farm. I can survive. I'm not in debt or anything. So, I was even thinking about it. My mind went into maybe I should borrow $5,000 this year to buy fertilizer and do all that kind of stuff. But I'm not going to do that. But I can see why people end up doing that. We didn't have a great coffee season this year. But I'm really working my magnets. I'll be fine. But the point is the minute you start borrowing money, you can never pay it back. I don't care who you are. And then we went into a credit society where now our only wealth basically comes from borrowing money. And that's how we are. And that's why we have this QE going on. There's $1 trillion basically being printed every year now. They're down to $800 billion this year, sure, right? it's not going to stop until everything collapses. Now it's an interesting concept to have one person in 200 growing food. It's an interesting concept to have changed our diets to the point where all we're eating is processed corn and soybeans made into whatever you want it to be in some package with a bunch of colorings and a bunch of flavorings to make you think you're actually eating food. So basically what they're doing is they're taking this GMO corn and soybeans that have all kinds of unknown proteins in it that have created all kinds of allergies for people, that literally have no nutrition, zero numbers on calcium and things like that, and people are getting sicker and sicker and sicker, fatter and fatter and fatter from eating these high-calorie, low-nutritional substances, basically concentration camp food, colored, and I got a phone call, but I'll get it later. And people don't know it because it happens so slowly. And so we're in a situation here in Hawaii where it's time to start taking our economy back. And the only way we're going to take our economy back is by creating wealth. So when I go over to Oahu, I'm going to take a bunch of seeds. And every one of those seeds could turn into a papaya tree for somebody. And every one of those seeds, literally, I mean, it might take 15 seeds to make one good tree. I mean, that's the way you plant seeds. Okay, so every 15 seeds is going to give somebody out of the ground a tree that's making 4 or 5 pounds of papaya every week. So every 15 seeds that I give out, and I'll give out a couple hundred to everybody, could create $4 or $5 worth of wealth out of thin air. That's going to be consumed. That person's going to spend it in their local economy. It could create $40, $50 in the local Oahu economy.
That's really important.
It's unbelievable. It's the basis of reality. When you start thinking about why are we in so much trouble right now here as a society? Why are we so barbarically attacking other countries? Why are we stealing raw materials from Africa? They're spending the world the international IMF is spending $1 billion. They're spending literally. It's called the $1 billion map, and they are going to quantify and map all of the resources of Africa. They're going to spend $1 billion to say where every last molecule of wealth is in Africa. Do you think they're doing that for the Africans? Do you think they're spending $1 billion because they want to help the Africans out with AIDS and all these weird vaccinations and all this horrible health stuff and Ebola and all these things that are happening to the Africans? And then we see the Sudan and South Sudan and Somalia and all these problems that are going on in there, and all this terrorism and these poor people in Congo and Rwanda and South Africa, and just this horrible stuff. That you think the IMF is going, oh, we're gonna take care of these people? No. It's called, how are we going to exploit Africa in the 21st century? And this is what they're spending $1 billion. You know what $1 billion could bring potable water probably to 100 different areas of Africa tomorrow. $1 billion could do so much.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have to look behind the headlines. And the thing that's been occupying my mind this week, though, and I want to talk about GMO first before I say that. I want to explain what GMO is. I want to explain what a GMO papaya is. So they tell you they've taken a few genes from a mosaic virus, and they've put it into a papaya, so the papaya now resists mosaic virus, and it'll just grow totally healthy. Okay? But let me explain what they really did. What they did is they created a cassette of genes. They had the genes from the mosaic virus. Okay? And I'm not even sure it's the mosaic virus that we had here in Hawaii, because when I first came here in 1970, 71, let's get back to what I was saying. I didn't want to be a farmer. I wanted to be a hunter-gatherer. So I went around to basically abandoned orchards and developed relationships with the farmers and the people that own the trees. And one of the first people I met was a man named Ramon.